Jamie, welcome to WealthChat. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we get started, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Jamie Reed. I am the founder and CEO of the BriteBirch Collective, which is a global network of over 200 marketing experts who we bring together around big client assignments and projects to try to help solve their business challenges.
Well, sounds amazing. And I suppose I am curious about marketing, particularly in today's society when our attention spans are not where they used to be. So let's start with how are firms trying to market more effectively to be it be the younger generation or even like some of the older generations who have so much information coming at them constantly?
Yeah. I mean, there's just all the channels these days. I think there's just so much choice. A lot of companies, a lot of people, individuals, anybody that's trying to market themselves, I think they don't always know where to go, how to reach people. What we're finding a lot more is that community building is a really great way to actually start to have other people sort of talk about you and build sort of these communities around your products and brands and stuff like that. And I think younger generations really value being with people like themselves. And similarly, I think the digital channels allow us to target much more specifically. So what we're finding is the same company might have the same broad message, but then targeting it more specifically using language, using images, using a much more targeted approach depending on who they're talking to. So if you go to LinkedIn, you're likely more talking to more business people. If you're going to TikTok, it's skewing more young. So you have to just kind of be really smart about that.
So there's a lot of customization. The idea of just sending out flyers to everyone is not really there.
Something like the Super Bowl is still like this mass opportunity to get in front of so many people. So I think there still are those moments where you want to have, one big message, but I think you have to be smart about what you're trying to achieve through those kinds of messages, because it's not necessarily going to, drive everyone to do the same action. So you have to have, a lot of outlets from those big platforms. But yeah, primarily everyone is targeting, and I think a lot of AI tools now are allowing people to do that with the click of a button. So you don't have to sit there and craft 20 messages. I think, ChatGPT can do it for you now.
Well, let's actually talk about AI and ChatGPT. So when I look at AI and ChatGPT and all these other language models, my focus has, of course, been on how they're helping different businesses cut out redundancy, duplications, but I haven't really thought about the marketing side of it. So can you speak a bit about what you're seeing and where you feel some of the potential lies?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that new, to be honest. I think in the agencies and a lot of, the MarTech space, there's been a lot of AI for a while now. What we're seeing now, though, is that same that happened to music studios, right? They all of a sudden became in people's living rooms, and so now anyone can produce their own music. It's kind of the same sort of thing where you have these super powerful marketing tools now that anyone can use. So that's really, it's the democratization, I think, of marketing that is sort of opening up new opportunities, and we're starting to see a lot of really great creativity coming from people that aren't necessarily traditional marketers, but are just playing with these tools. And so that's been really interesting to see. But in terms of what the future of the industry holds and how people will react, I mean, it's a little bit early to say, but you can expect that if you're a copywriter, if you're someone who does certain things that tend to be more transactional and not as on the creative side, like it could be the writing might be on the wall for you in terms of the future. But I think, the smart writers are already using these tools, and I think they're not good enough to replace good writing. They're not, the image ones aren't good enough to replace good photographers or good creatives. So they're really good for brainstorming and sort of getting some ideas on paper, but then I think they haven't replaced people yet.
That's interesting. Well, I think of ChatGPT where it might do some of your market research for you, right? So I can just ask ChatGPT, hey, I have X product. How do I effectively market to this segment? Or actually, who would use this product to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, so we use it for a lot of research. Again, it doesn't replace actual market research, but if you're building customer personas, for example, to kind of think about, again, the channels you want to go and the user journey. It's a great place to start, right? And they'll ChatGPT can spin up personas really, really easily, actually, and do them in a way that you can actually, even put yourself in the voice of your customer too. So you can ask ChatGPT, well, how would you respond if you were a 16-year-old, boy versus a 60-year-old boy, right? And just, it's getting really smart. Still not perfect, but it's getting closer and closer all the time.
It sure is. And I don't know, I just feel that there's an endless amount of possibilities for what these technologies can be used for because of how versatile they are and that they can be applicable to really any industry, which is quite amazing. Now, you mentioned writers and how some of them are already employing it and some aren't. I'm curious to know from a marketer standpoint, do you feel that it's eroding creativity in some ways?
I think people who don't understand what true creativity maybe is, right? Being creative isn't just putting whatever you want down on paper necessarily. Like that could be a form of creativity, but when you talk about creative in the advertising or marketing sense, there's a lot of effort and thought, and the creatives I've worked with in my career have always been very, they have their own processes. They'll go away for weeks and really think through ideas and test and play with all these different ideas. Then they'll refine them. So it's to do it right is still a process. Can you get something that's pretty darn good in a short period of time? Yeah, I mean it gets you 80% there, maybe 90, maybe soon it'll be 100%, but it gets you there faster in terms of some of that process. But it still won't replace the true creatives yet. And in fact, we do work with some designers and some creatives and some writers that their clients are telling them, actually, can you not use any AI, because they don't want to be, brands and companies don't want to be caught up in some of the IP issues that we're seeing as well through some of these models. So that's something to look out for too. I think the authenticity of humans doing the work is a bit of a backlash, and I think it might be something that's going to be more popular this year.
That's really interesting. I thought it might also be that they want the human touch instead of just having a machine generate some logos or images for them.
I mean, there's a part of that. I think there's a respect for the craft, right? That I think people want to maintain. They want people to be paid for the good work they do. And similarly, I think there's still that human voice. There's still that element of creativity that you can't really replicate. Like if you play enough with these tools, you can kind of tell who's using it and who's not. So it's not quite all there yet. And I think a lot of brands and creatives and people that are using these tools are sometimes actually purposely not using them, putting a little disclaimer saying that no AI was used in this copywriting, or no AI was used in this ad. And I think that that is we're going to see more of that, I think.
Yeah, that seems really interesting. And I feel like, I've had several conversations now surrounding AI, and I feel it always comes back to creating that harmony between human and machine and leveraging these technologies to enhance the output versus just eliminating a certain input, maybe at the human touch, or it might be a certain process. So I feel like there's a lot of potential here. I do want to speak a bit also about social media. And so can you speak a bit about what you're seeing in terms of marketing and social media, and how firms, maybe even startups, are starting to employ these technologies to their advantage, or platforms?
What we're seeing, with the market sort of turning a little bit downwards, we're seeing a lot more companies wanting to have a clear ROI on, I think, their marketing spend. And so a lot of these channels on the back end are doing a lot more to provide the metrics, to provide the dashboards and the opportunity for companies and brands to be able to sort of manage that. But what we're really seeing is sort of what we call revenue operations, and bringing more of the marketing and sales teams closer together. And so we're seeing a lot more content that's being co-created with the sales and marketing teams. in a way that is more, I guess, measurable to an actual sales. And I think that really helps the marketers themselves to kind of maintain, they're not just going back to their bosses saying, hey, I've got, so many likes and clicks. They're going back and saying, hey, we've driven this much business. And it's a different kind of conversation that I think marketers are trying to have now with in the businesses.
That 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 sounds logical that you would have sales be a part of marketing because sales is usually the force on the ground who are interacting. So now getting them involved in that process seems like the right way to do things, in my opinion. But when I think about social media and how that has even changed or evolved the landscape, even when it comes to marketing or even consumer behaviors, the fact that people will go to social media now for things like reviews and to see if how other people react to certain products. And how has that sort of changed the strategy or shifted things a bit for firms when it comes to using those platforms and when it comes to being a bit more creative versus just having some traditional techniques?
Yeah, there's just a lot of noise, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone thinks that what they have to say is the most important thing, right? And if it's like a real, you know, company message and it's all about a product and it's too salesy, I mean, we try to tell our clients that, it's maybe, what's in it for the audience, right? Is the question that we ask a lot. And why should they care? So I would say that, to cut through the noise, that's where creativity really does help. Creating something that people will pay attention to in their short attention span as they're flicking through videos that are super short. So trying to create something that is sticky, that people want to share, that people want to, maybe rehash and that's one thing that we're actually seeing a lot more of that I think companies also have to get used to is you put your content out there, someone might take it, they might splice it, they might, do something funny with it. It might not be on brand, but that's part of the community aspect of this, right? Because now more people are talking about it and it's getting more exposure. So you have to, companies need to be a bit more relaxed a little bit if they're going to start doing stuff in social, because I think with the younger generations, nothing's sacred. And so they're willing to, play around and have fun with your content. You have to be ready for that.
That makes sense. And I'm sure that there are some firms or some industries that are a lot more traditional and who may be having a bit of a difficult time keeping up right now. So what would you, I guess besides being a bit more relaxed, what would you recommend to those types of firms?
Yeah. So I've worked a lot in pharma and healthcare, and a lot of my clients, I helped them get into social media, and it was very tough, right? Dealing with the lawyers and dealing with the procurement and dealing with everyone that wanted to say, no, we can't be in social, we can't do that. Well, now you can't not be in social. So somehow we figured out a way to do it. I think trying to find the people within organizations that are more willing to say yes than to say no and give it a shot. And, everything in moderation, test and learn, I think is the best way forward. But don't just say no. I think the more you can experiment, the more you can try. You never know. Some platforms will come and they'll die a week later. Some platforms, if you're one of the first ones on there and it ends up being a really popular platform, you're kind of like trailblazer. So you see the companies that win in the marketing game tend to be at the forefront and not at the back on the back foot.
Right. And especially if you're trying to get the younger generation, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, I think is the
Yeah.
youngest one now. They essentially live on social media. So how else are you going to get their attention?
Yeah, it's what's interesting is we're seeing that there's a pushback from the Gen Alphas and stuff. Like they're getting flip phones. They're trying to move. They're seeing their parents, the boomers, and everything like on their phones all the time. And I think they're rebelling against that a little bit. So it's interesting to see. There's going to be sort of, I think, two camps in the world. We're going to see people that just want to live in the forest and, touch grass all the time and just be sort of detached from the digital world. And there's be people like we're seeing now who are wearing VR headsets on subways and walking down the street, right? So the world's gonna sort of split probably into the technophobes and the technologists who really embrace the technologies. And I think a lot of that comes down to also just how much media we have to consume, and people are getting overloaded. People are right. So I think detaching is not a bad thing. So finding the right balance, and companies that are recognizing that and have like a wellness sort of angle to what they're trying to do, I think they're trying to find balance between pushing too much out there and pushing the right things out there.
That makes sense, and I feel digital burnout is a very real thing. So it's interesting to hear that even I suppose there's a perception that, oh, if you're young, you're just all about the internet and social media. And perhaps it is time that we start looking to break that and say, okay, no, we can't really just put them in masses based on age group. There are different preferences within those brackets. But the idea that because they're seeing what I suppose technology and social media has done to their parents or grandparents or other family members or friends, there's a cautionary tale there. And I find that fascinating. And can you maybe speak a bit more to that about how some of the consumer behaviors are changing now because of what they're viewing? Like, how would you now try to gain the attention of those cohorts?
I mean, people still want to connect in the real world. I think going back to some of that, right? COVID really pushed us in one direction, and it's time to sort of reclaim our humanity, I think, a little bit. And so we're seeing a lot more real life meetups and opportunities for people to connect and network. I think all generations, all people want to hang out with people like themselves. And so, if you're trying to target a certain demographic, create an experience, something memorable, and bring those people together. And you don't have to sell them on anything. That's again where the community flywheel model is really important, I think, in today's marketing. But the other thing too that I wanted to raise was, we're seeing now a lot of AI generated avatars and influencers, right? So you flip through Instagram, some of those people that you're looking at that look perfect, they're actually not people. They look like, they're fake, right? They're AI generated. And we're seeing, the Vancouver airport, for example, actually has does digital twin of the airport, right? This concept of a digital twin. I think we're going to start seeing individuals doing that. So where you don't want to necessarily expose yourself, where you don't necessarily want to have, yourself constantly in the mix trying to push all this content out. Maybe we're going to have AI trained on our own data, on our own socials, and be able to kind of put forward yourself, but an avatar of yourself to, handle all that. And we're going to start seeing, I think, a little bit more of, individuals having digital twins and sort of what does that mean and how does that work? But it's definitely coming.
That's really fascinating. Like, I've heard of digital twins, but it's usually more of in the area of an average of a set of people. So, like, how would these people react to this? How would those people react to that? But the idea that a digital twin will just be focused on you and you can now have this online. I mean, it's sort of like I had a previous guest here who spoke about people becoming tokenized. Right. And so you're just going to be on the blockchain, and depending on how well you do, there'll be tokens that are issued for you. And I feel like it's kind of crazy and interesting, but it almost seems as though we're being like ripped into like some two very different areas. So like one is like hyper AI and digitization, and the other is like, nope, as you mentioned, I want to be in the middle of the woods in a cabin. And so how do you operate in that type of world in an effective manner and try to strike a balance?
I personally do bonsai. So I got into it during COVID, and I was like, and it was in a response to NFTs. So as I was learning about NFTs and tokenizing sort of digital assets and bringing permanence to something that's digital, I thought this is a really cool concept. What's the natural version? What's the non-digital version of that? And I was thinking, well, if you can miniaturize a tree, put it in a pot, you could bring it around. If the world, went up in flames tomorrow and I was the only one left with the only apple tree, you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like a little miniature version of nature. So I was kind of, that's what got me into bonsai, but now I'm just into it because it's so meditative and just being able to, it's gardening, but with trees over, 20 years, as opposed to, digging in a garden with flowers. So it's a longer process. It's taught me a lot more patience, and it's, you're in nature while you're doing it. So yeah, that's been sort of how I do it. I think everyone needs to find that outlet.
That sounds amazing. And to your point, I feel that in order to stay grounded, for most people at least, I'm sure there's some variances there, but you need to have moderation. You need to have at some point where you go outside and touch the grass, but also that you're able to enjoy the more modern amenities. So if you want to like I've know a fair number of gamers, and they'll just like stay locked in their basement for like the entire weekend, and they're just there playing this game, and it's sort of like you, you need to learn that it's okay to like pause, or to like when you're finished maybe one game before you start the next, to go outside and maybe take a walk and breathe. And um, I think that balance is really important. And there are a lot of people who are having a difficult time achieving it. And so, your example about the bonsai tree, like I think it's amazing, because that's something that will requires its own special set of skills. And it teaches you things, and you can I'm sure it requires a fair amount of care, but like you don't have to like have a set schedule for that. Like you can actually go and do it as needed. And that's an outlet that a lot of people need. Like they need to find something like that, whether it be like for me, like I really enjoy fitness. So working out is a part of my life. And if I don't do it for a certain days in a row, like you can tell based on my mood that, she hasn't worked out. And so when I think about that, and then I look at things like social media and the fact that you have things like fitness influencers, you know, obviously there's some who may not be giving the most healthy advice, but there are others who are. And I feel that people sometimes just need something that they can connect with and say, okay, you know what? Like if this person can work out 4 times a week, then so can I. Like they have something to mark themselves against.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. I mean, I've killed a lot of trees doing bonsai, right? So I think there's always going to be a trial and error and some learning when you try these kinds of things. But you got to find what you love. I was similarly kind of finding myself really like angsty and kind of getting angry at my kids. And I realized it was because I hadn't played basketball that week, so I think we do need those things, and it can be easy. I play video games too. Like I have a regular Monday night video game with some friends around the world. So it's a great opportunity to connect people. I think there's a lot of positives to these technologies, right? But it's all like anything, moderation, being cognizant and aware of how it works. I think being myself in media and having done this, like, I read every article in the news with a little bit of skepticism. I read, anything I watch, right? From a very early time of like Instagram, I was very aware that those Instagram models and those lives that they were living, probably if you like turn the camera the other way, that it wasn't so perfect, right? So a lot of people don't have that sort of media literacy to question what they see and what they hear and what they read. It's important. I think that's a skill set that they should be teaching in school, is media literacy, because otherwise you're getting a lot of young people who are depressed, who see all these other people with glitzy lives and perfect lives, and it's not the truth, right? It's not real. But for them, it's like, why don't I have that? I need that. And so people's own self-value and self-worth is skewed, and that's where it gets dangerous. I think it's just being aware and being knowledgeable about the fact that not all of it's real.
That's so true. Like, I feel like I have very little media literacy, to be honest, because I'm not on social media for that reason. But like when I see things on Instagram, but people show me, or if I'm just somehow scrolling and I come across something, I do think it's real. Like I didn't really understand Photoshop until very recently. As embarrassing as that might be, like I did. I'm like, oh my God, how do you look like that? That's amazing, right? And it is because again, I didn't know that you can go and like manipulate your body and your face in different ways on Instagram. So I feel, especially if we think about the younger generations, and if we're talking about health, like that's dangerous. Like you're showing them images that are just not realistic. And now, um, I'm sure that little boys have issues as well with this stuff. But like, as a girl, I can speak about girls and say that what, especially when you're like a preteen girl or a teenage girl and you get onto social media, like it can be very difficult to like be going through certain changes in your life and you're seeing someone else who just looks absolutely perfect and you don't, and it's very demoralizing and disheartening. So to your point of introducing media literacy and teaching them that these things are not real in school, I think is very important so that they don't feel bad needlessly. Like there's no reason to feel bad about something that you see on Instagram because, as you mentioned, there's a high probability that it's not real.
Yeah. And as VR and stuff like that get more real, right? People are going to start living like second lives essentially in the metaverse or in, these virtual digital realms. It's going to be harder and harder to detach from those things and to be able to also understand that, what's the real world and what's not. I mean, it's a philosophical question because if you truly enjoy being in this virtual world, it could be real to you. But so I don't want to dismiss that, but I also want, people to understand that you can't feed yourself digital pixels, right? You have to still eat food and you still have to drink water and you still need human touch and you still need, to look people in the eyes. And we still need to be human at the end of the day, right? So that's the challenge. And young girls, young boys too. I mean, we're seeing a lot of young people just generally just being confused about what they're seeing and what they're believing. And there is, again, the younger generation is pushing back a little bit on some of that. You look at, I think, is it Billie Eilish, the singer, right? She dresses, very baggy. Like she does not want to, sell like the sexualized version of what a lot of young pop stars will do. And I think that really endears her to a lot of young people because, they don't want that. And so that demonstrates a certain amount of literacy on their part too. And this goes same with the flip phones, like I was saying. They're purposely trying to detach a little bit and again, touch grass and be in the real world, which it gives me a bit of hope, to be honest, for that next generation. And I think it might be because they're the kids of Gen X, right? I'm a Gen X, so like the last generation where we played out in the streets and we didn't really get introduced to digital technologies until maybe high school or university and stuff like that. So we had that sort of youth, scraping our knees and playing in the forests, and then the still understand technology and stuff. So we've been able to kind of balance those two worlds. And our kids, my kids don't have phones. My kids get very structured video game time and stuff like that. So I think hopefully, parents are starting to learn, what to teach their kids and how to expose them to certain, healthy behaviors.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that, as I say, it does start at home, but it can also be difficult because your kids do go out into the world, and based on what they're exposed to there, it can create challenges. It's funny that you mentioned the metaverse and VR, and I think that's another very interesting realm. Um, I, for instance, was astonished when I learned that people were buying real estate in some of these worlds. I think it was in Decentraland, and like 6 figures for prime like real estate. And I was like, but you're never gonna be able to like physically touch it. But to your point, there are some who may spend so much time in that universe that it becomes real to them, and like how do you properly balance that? Like that's a question that's going to need to be answered at some point. But when I think about Web 3D and like or Decentraland or VR or any of these like virtual universes, and then since we're speaking about marketing, the possibilities that are introduced of, what if Meta decides that they're just going to blast you with like their Meta advertisements while you're in their world, or like, what if Decentraland or some other one out there decides to partner up with someone, and now whenever you're there, it's like every 10 second or every 10 minutes, there's like a 30-second pause where you're just like these ads are spammed at you.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon Prime all of a sudden is starting to, make me watch ads. We're canceling Amazon Prime, right? So I think it doesn't matter if it's a virtual world or the real world. If companies are too salesy and just, not considerate of the experiences that the reason people are there in the first place, right? You need to be complementary to people's own impulses and the human nature that we have to be together and to enjoy our time together. And if that's in a virtual world, then don't get in the way of that. Don't put a billboard between you and your, these two friends, because those friends will go somewhere else, right? And so I think there needs to be a really fine balance and a soft touch for these things, because like we were talking at the beginning, there's so much option these days, and for every virtual world, there'll be 20 others versions coming down the road that, people will jump ship. So you have to be really careful.
Since you brought up ads, do ads work nowadays? And I ask this because, like, I walk down the streets of downtown Toronto, or whenever I'm in the concourse, there's just like ads everywhere, and it's become to the point where I genuinely like do not know what I'm looking at, just because I'm so desensitized that like I don't even pay attention to it. So I guess, do ads work, first of all? Like,
It depends. It depends on like what that means by works, right? Because like ads, you create an ad with something in mind in terms of your goals, right? And so if an ad is designed, like a car ad, for example, a lot of car ads don't sell cars. They're meant to actually reinforce that you've already bought that car. It's a brand exercise to try to build sort of that sense of longing for the brand, because that's the car I bought. So it gives you that sense of like, yeah, I made the right decision and I have trust in this brand. And so there's a lot of different reasons why you would have an ad. And I think it was Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian, who said medium is the message also, right? So ads in different formats, in different mediums, do different things. I remember the first time I went to Hong Kong, similar to what you were just explaining, I was just like, there's ads everywhere. Like, how are these even being, it was overwhelming. And it's like, why, how is this even working? But then, I sat down at a table and there was even a sticker someone had stuck to the table and I was reading it, you know what I mean? And so you kind of, they don't always work. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they do what they're supposed to do. Sometimes they're just there to just make you feel good as a company. There's a lot of advertising is sort of companies spend money just because they think that just to make them feel good about, oh, hey, look, there's my ad, and a lot of PR is done like that too. It's like, oh, I want to be in the newspaper. I want my company to be in the newspaper. It's not the right reason, but it's sometimes a reason. So it's interesting when you've been in this industry long enough, there's any number of reasons why people will create ads or place ads, but they may not always be for, effective reasons or the right reasons, but.
well, it's funny because you brought up the Super Bowl earlier, and now we're talking about like ads being effective or for the right reason. Like, when I first learned about how much it cost to have like a 30-second slot at the Super Bowl, my mind was blown. I was like, are you serious? Like, that could be like your entire year's budget right there. So I suppose sometimes it is just because they want to be seen, and it's, I guess, that glamour almost of like, hey, we had a Super Bowl ad.
Exactly.
Right? That's interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of egos that get stroked in the advertising industry.
Well, I feel like that's a lot of industries, if we're being honest. And that seems to be a very human thing,
Mm-hmm.
Having ego and pride in what you do. Now, my background, as those that watch this podcast know, that is in the wealth management industry. And I look at that industry and its evolution, and I guess overall how like the financial services area sort of advertises itself. And Canada, obviously, we know that we have like a very secure system where, regardless of like which bank you decide to go with, your money's safe, right? So that's not something that they can differentiate themselves on, is security. So what have you seen, and how are, I suppose, financial services trying to position themselves to consumers?
Yeah, Canada's an interesting case because, like you said, it's more controlled. It's more regulated. Um, Traditionally, it's been a really safe and good place to kind of keep your money and invest. But it's changing. The world's changing quickly, and I don't know how fast Canadian regulations and how fast banks are jumping on to a lot of the big trends that are happening in this space. I would hope that they're trying as opposed to just blocking, right? I do see, like in crypto, for example, the fact that you know Kraken and Coinbase and some of these platforms aren't allowed to. Canadians can't have stable coins. That was a rule that they've, there's no real explanation why, but Canadians apparently can't use stable coins. And I think there's a bit of pushback now from the industry to be like, well, like why not? Like let's rethink this. And similarly, things like open banking, right, are I don't think anyone's in disagreement about the benefits of open banking, but somehow there still seems to always be a lot of blockers or reasons why we need to have another committee to try to, think about it. And that's very Canadian, I find. But really, we're seeing a lot more self-sovereignty when it comes to people taking control of their own money. It's not just in wealth. I think a lot of, in healthcare, I think we're moving towards a lot of those things. People have these supercomputers now in their hands all the time. Why shouldn't I manage my own identity? Why shouldn't I manage my own money? Why shouldn't I, so that there is a trend that way. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these sort of platforms where people can invest and do their own stuff. When it comes to like wealth management firms and whatnot, I don't know. I think a lot of what we're seeing is just the change in this wealth transfer that's happening, right? I think it's like the world's largest transfer of wealth in history. I think I saw a number like $100 trillion is being transferred to, the next generation. That next generation, they have different priorities, right? Like we're not our parents. And so, what they're interested in, it seems to be, diversifying. They're more interested in global markets. They're more interested in, ESG, anything that's sort of, meant to give back to the environment or meant to sort of do good, social good. And so I think we're seeing also, new positioning of wealth management towards, these types of things. It's slow as well. Like we're not seeing a lot of it, but for those organizations that are starting to pivot and look at how to appeal to the next generation, I think that's something we're going to see a lot more of in the next few years.
Yes. To your point, the younger generations, they are a lot more interested in meaningful interactions, right? So ESG is quite big, and it's not just the label of ESG. It's actually knowing that there is good being done, and investing with your principles and values is important to people. And so that's been a very big trend, and I think that's a great thing. Putting money where you feel like it's doing the most good for your society is not a bad thing at all. And this cohort, to your point, is different than their parents and their grandparents, where they're not. We don't really look at like retirement planning anymore as much with the younger cohorts, right? Where traditionally, you went to your advisor and you invested, and the whole goal was, I'm going to get to retirement, and this is how much I'm going to have, and this is what I'm going to be able to do. And now it's more like, let's think about like what I want to do in 5 years versus 35 years, right? Because who knows what's going to happen in 35
Exactly.
years.
I mean, even 5 years, like people ask me, like, what's your 5-year plan? I was like, I don't know, ask me what my 5-month plan is. Cause I think the world changes too quickly, right? Like you said. And, yeah, like if people want to spend their money now also, right? So like, what's the point of saving all this money if I'm not going to enjoy it? And so we are seeing a lot more, again, experiences is a word that we hear a lot more of, memorable experiences. And the more you can create for that in your life, the more enriched you are. I don't ask for Christmas presents anymore because I don't need more stuff, right? I want like take me on a trip or bring me, like let's go to a hockey game or something, that I can remember and have a good time with someone that I care about. I think there's much more value in that sort of stuff. And so we are seeing that to be a general trend also, is just people are starting to become less materialistic, which is great, I think. I mean, it's good for the environment, and it might not be great for, certain brands and things like that, but maybe it's time we dial that back a little bit.
But it is, again, about things that are meaningful. And as for materialism, there will always be material things, but it might, one of the things that I'm an environmentalist myself. I love being outdoors in nature One of my favorite activities is hiking. So I want to do everything that I can to protect the nature that brings me so much joy. And one of the things that drives me absolutely insane is fast fashion.
Mm.
Because it's just terrible where you're meant to wear this thing maybe 2 or 3 times and then it's gone. Or sometimes even once, you throw it in the washing machine and it's done. And then it's going to go and sit in a landfill somewhere. And it's awful. So I feel that this trend of moving towards things that are more meaningful and buying things that, perhaps instead of buying something that is a bit more expensive, but that will last you much longer and is a better move than just wanting something different constantly. And of course, this also comes back to personal preferences, but that is an area where I'm seeing some movement, and that makes me happy because I'm glad that people are thinking about the choices that they make. Because for a long time, I don't believe anyone has any nefarious reasons for the things that they do. It's more that they just don't think about those things or they're not aware. And there has been a lot more awareness towards this issue, which has made me happy. But also to your point about things changing very quickly and people now wanting to focus on the short term, that has been a big shift within. I feel pretty much within every industry, but particularly within wealth management and financial services, because that's where people's money sits. And so, what do I want to do with it? And it's very true that there are many who now think about what do I want to do with this money now versus 10 years from now. And you brought up wealth transfers. The next inheritors of wealth will be the women because they will be the ones that are the surviving partner, and they're interested in experiences. Like they don't want to just leave a will and say, okay, I'm going to give this grandson or this nephew or niece an X percentage. They want to take that trip with their family members, and they want to have that experience, and they want those memories. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, my parents want to spend it on golf, and it's it's definitely changing how people, their relationship with money. I think it's changing, and I think it's interesting and it's important because as things like AI, I don't have really an opinion on things like universal income and that sort of stuff, but like there's these, people are trying new models and they're looking at new ways of doing these kinds of things, and we might end up moving into a place where, if we have computers and AI doing the work for us, then what are we going to do with our own time? What are we going to do for ourselves? And so hopefully there's a renaissance. We get back into doing art and bonsai and positive, things, as opposed to buying stuff and trying to fill that hole in our heart with material goods. And to the topic of like fast fashion and whatnot, like there's a lot of stuff that is disposable like that. And I remember being a kid and I had my jeans patched up 20 times before I would hand them down to my brother. So, and it's true. It's very convenient to outfit my kids in, stuff from fast fashion brands. Where do you find quality clothes? Like, but you're right. There are now, boutiques and stores online that you can go specifically to find stuff that's made really well. And I think those things, people should seek those out more.
I completely agree with that. So I feel like we do keep coming back to AI, and that's because it is just everywhere. And it's sort of like, how do we leverage it properly is the main question that we return to. And so during the last episode, I had Murtaza Haider, a professor from MTU, come in, and he spoke about, yes, AI may replace jobs. I don't believe it's going to be in the numbers that people fear it will be. I think it'll be smaller percentages. But we discussed this idea that, and you also alluded to this will now give people time to actually do other things, more meaningful things that will benefit society more greatly than perhaps, punching numbers all day or doing some other thing that you may not even enjoy doing, but you have to. And I feel like that will create a happier society, and a happier society can actually is a better society, but there's also more positive output where I think that this will lead people to create more things that will make our lives better. And so it's sort of like, let AI do a bit of the grunt work that no one wants, and let's focus on like those meaningful things that people do want, and focus on creating a better world for ourselves. I mean, you and I had discussions before, but like there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of different systems that tends to be the bottleneck and makes things less pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine if now you can implement AI and remove that bureaucracy and get things to move at a
Can't
decent
wait.
pace.
Can't wait. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not a. I don't. I don't fear technology. It's a tool, right? I think people are. People won't lose their jobs to AI. People will lose their jobs to people with using AI, right? And so I think we should all be getting familiar with it, getting used to it as a technology, and trying to see how we can apply it. Um, and then, like you said, BriteBirch was built on this idea of people want to do work the way they want to work, and a lot of our members are they have side hustles, and they have they'll do some consulting on the side, and they have that extra time now, and I think that sometimes they need to supplement their income also. It's the reason, but it's there will come a time where we're going to have more free time because of the way the technology works, and we're in a knowledge economy. I mean, you're still going to need people who can do construction, and there's going to be still a lot of need for those kinds of jobs. But in the knowledge industries, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be very interesting to see over the next few years. And it's not just AI. Like I think there's like a confluence of different technologies that are all seem to be maturing at the same time, which is also super intriguing for me. Which is like, say, for example, if you were to have a quantum computer, which is, that technology's, I think IBM might have shipped the first, commercial quantum computer recently. And so once you start plugging quantum computers into AI, right, and giving it that extra, power to model many billions more things in a second. At the same time, you have like edge computing, and so just the technology that goes into the cameras and the refrigerator and like things like that are just in your house or in the streets. And then you have things like VR and being able to go into like these virtual worlds, and then blockchain, which creates these immutable data so that it'll make the AI cleaner and less hackable, right? So I think there's a lot of these kind of technologies that are all maturing at the same time. It's going to be really interesting to see over the next probably decade, like how they start. Oh, the other one too is fission, right? Like just being able to take the power of the sun and use that to power things. Like they're building these nuclear reactors now that are quite small, like the size of a room, that you can move around and power things. So like just even the way that we're looking at energy and power is also shifting very quickly. So there's just some really interesting, exciting things happening. And yeah, a lot of it's happening in the other parts of the world. They're not really happening. Canada does really well in like certain instances when it comes to like the academic side of things. We're usually at the forefront of a lot of this stuff, but the rest of the world's actually applying it. So
That's true. Now, you have a fair bit of experience in other parts of the world. Let's start with Asia Pacific, because I'm always very fascinated by that region. How it seems like I learn about something, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then I learn that, you know what? If you like go to Japan or Korea or China, they've actually have been doing this for quite a while. I mean, recently in Toronto, our subway system got Wi-Fi, which was very exciting for a lot of people. And then I spoke to some friends abroad, and they're like, yeah, we've had that for like 20 years now. And I'm like, oh, thank you. That makes me feel really good.
yeah, I mean, I told you not to get me started on the reverse culture shock that I've experienced coming back to Canada. But there's lots. I mean, Asia excites me to no end. Every aspect of it, the way that they blend tradition, right? They're not afraid to like hold on to a lot of traditions, but they're still pushing forward from a technological standpoint, and they're embracing, a move forward, right? In both in societies and in the way that they operate and apply tech. I think, there's a lot of learning that we as Canadians, sometimes we're a little complacent, and we think everything's just been going so great. It's going to keep going great. And, for people that I talk to that live abroad or that see have been around the world quite a lot, I think they're starting to see that there's some challenges that Canada's going to be facing fairly soon that, we should be looking to places like Asia Pacific for a lot of ideas. But also I think there's a lot that we can offer that part of the world too. And so I've been working with the Canada ASEAN Business Council, trying to help build trade corridors and raise awareness of the opportunities between Canada and Southeast Asia, which has, been really fulfilling actually, that we've been seeing a lot more progress in that respect recently. So I think it's starting, but as things do in Canada, they tend to move slower than you want them to, but at least they're moving in the right direction.
Well, and that gives me hope, the fact that we are looking in other places and some of our decision makers are aware. So it's not that we're not open to exploring ideas. But the reason I wanted to speak about, I suppose, Asia Pacific was what you mentioned, which is they're able to retain their traditions and culture, but also benefit from technology and utilize these things and enhance their way of life, which gives them more time, I would say, to focus on some of those cultural and traditional aspects of their lives. And I fear that with AI, sometimes we may lose that. But when I look at that part of the world, it gives me hope and says, no, you know what? It's possible for us to retain, again, our cultural way of life, while being able to employ these technologies for good, and and that will result in like a very net positive result, versus being concerned that by introducing these things we're just losing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a great example is like the tradition of how older people live in Asia, right? They stay in the family. Usually, as they get older and they can't look after themselves, they'll move in with the kids. And there's a benefit because the grandparents are kind of there and they're close to the children. And so you have that sort of like babysitter also at home, that extra pair of hands. But it also keeps the older people engaged and socially engaged also, and just so there's less dementia, there's less all these things. But as some of us know, like there's pressures on families now too, where you're looking after kids and you're looking after your parents as they're aging, and so a lot of to maintain that family value that you see a lot in Asia with having keeping parents in the house, they're applying all these great technologies to help older people stay at home and help older people sort of live and be for the parents not having to worry about the grandparents necessarily being at home, and so they're monitoring and having all these technologies to kind of support the systems that they value. I think that's where we have to learn what we value, right? What do we think is important that we need to maintain, and then don't replace it with technology, but then find out how you can reinforce it with technology, right?
That makes sense. And I mean, I believe it is there. They have the robot nurse, Grace, I think is her name. It's really fascinating. I mean, I had this idea of we should have like Roombas, like AI powered Roombas, and just give those to senior citizens who are in need of help, and they'll like track them and monitor and make sure that everything's okay, right?
Sure.
But it comes back to, again, having trust in that technology. And that's another aspect when we look at AI and marketing is, how do you establish a trustworthy brand? Where when I think about AI, for instance, like it has all my data, like it has everything. And how do I ensure that it's not going to do something that I don't want it to do?
Yeah. Well, it's good you're asking that question. Talking about Roombas, I actually interviewed the inventor of the Roomba not too long ago for a project I was doing with LG. And it was actually all about AI. And what was happening was, this was before ChatGPT and before all that, we were starting to see a lot more consumer AI. If you think about your phone, if you think about your Google Home, if you're thinking about all of these applications you have, a lot of them are powered by AI, right? The Netflix shows that are being presented to you. And again, going back to like media literacy, there's a lot of people that just didn't know that they were already using AI, right? It's only now that people are actively using it because of ChatGPT primarily, and the ilk. But what the whole program around with this LG project was to start to, help think about the human who is going to be the end user of these AI systems, to think about them from the beginning. Because what's happening is a lot of, not they're not doing it on because they're evil, but there's a lot of there's a lot of technologists and there's a lot of developers and programmers that are in the lab and they're building these great systems, these great AI systems, but they're not thinking about how it's going to be used at the end of the day, right? Is it going to be taking people's information? Is it going to be hackable? Is it going to be giving them biased information, right? Like there's a lot of issues and that they're not necessarily considering because they're not thinking of the human, they're thinking of the technology first. And so this project was really about how do we build more design thinking into the process? How do we build more, what's the AI UX? And so the project was called AIX because we're trying to come up with this artificial intelligence experience and how do we build better experience for AI? And then ChatGPT came out and it's, that world changes so fast. So I don't even know how relevant all of that stuff was a few years ago. But we were having those questions, all these questions you're asking, we were asking those questions 5 years ago. And even then it felt like things were changing really quickly. So as long as we keep asking those questions, we'll be in a good place. It's when we stop asking those questions, we have to worry.
Part of it is our regulatory environment, I suppose, and ensuring that we're protected, like consumer rights. And another chunk of it is also, again, you brought up media literacy, and I completely agree with that. And also what I suppose what I would call like data literacy, like knowing what's happening with your data, what you're giving out, what it means. And I mean, I've had this discussion before, but like those user agreements, the EULA agreements,
Yeah.
I've never read one.
No.
And so I feel that there needs to be a change with that because realistically, like I've been told that those things can't even stand in court because it's well known that no one reads them. And so you don't actually have true consent with those. And so how do you ensure that you're doing the best for the end consumer in that regard where yes, you're going to be collecting their data, but like for instance, in the open banking example, you collect data, but it's for the benefit of the consumer. They fully know what you're going to collect and for how long you're going to keep it. And I feel that we need to have that type of agreement with some of these other things too.
Yeah,
around AI.
With COVID, our homes became our offices, they became our schools, they became, I think we're inviting this technology into our homes, we're using it in our cars, we're using it in the street. More and more governments are installing cameras and, we're being monitored. And so you're right, like there's a big privacy issue, there's a big security issue. But on the flip side, people are also willing to share so many things on their social media feeds, right? That we would have thought that's very personal. So are we coming, as people, are we coming to a new understanding of what is privacy? What is my data? Is it mine? Is it all of ours? Like, what is it actually saying? Like, if you looked at the data points that, you only need, I think, 100 data points to be able to influence someone to do what you want, right? And so there's understanding sort of people's emotional sort of behaviors and how they react to things. If you're a pessimist or an optimist, right? Like how to make someone react differently based on who they are and their personality. So there's a lot of dangers when it comes to having this data, but at the same time too, so much of it's noise, and it's not good data. If you think about all of those forms you filled, have you always put your real name? Have you always put your real birthday? Have you always put, you know what I mean? Sometimes I purposely don't, just because I want the data to be a little bit messy because I don't want people to know exactly about me. So I think, we're seeing people who design sort of face masks that they can wear in the street, so that the cameras can't identify their, facial recognition and stuff like that. So there's always going to be a pushback
Right.
on these kinds of things. And it's interesting to see, and it's interesting to consider. There's some U of T has Stephen Mann was a professor there. I think he still is, but he's someone that had these VR goggles way before anyone else, that he would walk around and all the billboards would be changed into art. So he didn't want any advertising. So anytime he looked at an ad, it would replace it with fine art. So
Hold on. So these are wearable goggles.
He's kind of a cyborg. So he's implanted a lot of technology into his body. So you should look him up. He's an interesting guy.
This is Stephen Mann?
Yeah, I think that's his name. Yeah.
Okay. Oh wow. So he's become a bit of a cyborg, and he has these goggles that will transform ads into art.
Yeah, so he basically programmed it so that anytime he looked, like he was walking down the street, if he saw an ad on the side of a bus, that it would automatically replace that ad with something more visually pleasing to his eye.
Oh wow.
Right? So you can, again, use these powers for good. You can use the same technology that's being used to harvest your data to skew the data, or you can be using the same technologies that are trying to put ads in front of you to actually replace those ads. So there's always going to be a balance. I think the market will always find a nice, safe balance where people will accept or not accept certain things. And we're right now pushing the limits, I think. And so it's expected that there'll be some pushback.
Right. Yes, cyborgs. I mean, I've heard about robots. I've heard about robot servers. And obviously, I believe Elon Musk has implanted a Neuralink chip successfully into someone. So we're definitely going within that realm, and it's fascinating. But personally, I'm also a little bit wary of how far will this go.
Yeah.
But again, I feel that that's why there is pushback, and that pushback is what will sort of keep things in line so that we don't go too far to a point of no return.
Yeah. I mean, so Neuralink's a great example because when I first started in marketing, I was working at a hospital just over here called Toronto Rehab. I believe it's part of the OHN network now. But there was Dr. Milos Popovic who worked in the spinal cord rehab center, and he was a brilliant researcher. I think he's in charge of its programs called KITE now. And this must have been 25 years ago now almost. And he was implanting chips into, I don't know if he's implanting them necessarily, but he was definitely reading people's brain scans and allowing people with spinal cord injury to remote control airplanes and stuff like that, or to use a mouse, just thinking about how they wanted it to move. So this technology's existed, and it's already being applied in medical areas. So it's kind of, that's something that we see a lot of, is things that have these commercial uses in industry, or in a lot of times the military, or in space exploration, right? They'll push the limits of these technologies, but then very quickly we'll see them come to market and see them be turned into actual, consumer goods, which, it's happening faster. I think that the speed that's happening now, we're reading about some kind of far-fetched technology, and then all of a sudden, we have it, and so I wonder if that is going to get, that timeline is going to keep shrinking, where, well, a good example actually, maybe where it's actually starting to reverse is, I was reading an article about how that Mars helicopter that recently was having some technical issues, and I think it finally stopped, but super successful program. They just could not get it to be light enough using the standard NASA protocols and for radiation shielding and stuff like that. And so they ended up turning to, the consumer drone manufacturers and using just regular drone parts. And it was this huge success. It brought the cost down like crazy. It flew, I forget for how long on Mars, but it didn't really have any problems. So in a lot of ways, consumer tech now is getting so good that it's starting to reverse even, which is interesting.
That is interesting. I hadn't heard about that. I'll have to look into it. But I mean, yeah, space is another area that's very fascinating, and there's a lot of innovation there. And I'm not sure if they're still going ahead with Elon wants to send people to Mars, I believe.
Yeah.
And they were not going to return. And like the advertising around that and how that was presented to people was very interesting, where it was sort of poking at your sense of exploration, but also like the betterment of humanity. Hey, you're going to be helping people. You're going to be helping a whole civilization
Sure.
by going off into space and
Or
never
being the
coming
first
back.
person to implant a chip in your brain. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's always going to be someone who puts their hand up for that sort of thing. I'm of the mind that I'm there's certain technologies I'm willing to be at the front of the bell curve, and then there's some technologies I'm happy to be at the back of the bell curve, and I'll let other people experiment with that stuff until I finally get my brain chip or decide to go to Mars. I'll let other people blaze that trail.
Yeah. That sounds very reasonable. Uh, Now, we earlier on we were discussing financial services and wealth management. One of the big trends that we saw for a while, and I'm sure we'll continue to see for a while as well, is advisors are leaving like the large firms and they're going off on their own. And I feel like this is where they require help with things like branding and marketing. And so if if you were to advise an advisor who has, let's say, a successful book, they've been with, a large corporation for over a decade, and now they want to strike out on their own. Like when they think about their marketing and what their marketing needs are, like what are some of those thoughts that they should be having?
Yeah, I mean, so personal branding um, is an area that is evolving, as all areas are. But I think people's expectations of um, you know, individuals working for themselves is different than corporations, right? And so I think there's a certain amount of personality that needs to shine through. So my recommendation always, whether it's to CEOs of major companies or to independent people, as much as possible, I think it's okay to be yourself and to be authentic is in the first place. And then secondly, like have a point of view, even if it's a little bit risky or if it's a little bit, not the norm, to to spur a little bit of controversy, to get people talking, to get people to consider alternatives and think differently. If you're going out there and you're selling the same thing as everyone else, saying the same thing as everyone else, then don't be surprised if your clients choose someone else, right? So you have to stick your neck out a little bit and be a bit brave that way. But there's no magic formula necessarily, and I think, again, it comes down to relationships and building personal networks and being on the ground and shaking hands and looking people in the eyes. I think is still super important. And I think something like wealth management, that would be extremely important. So those would, be my general advice. Like you have to kind of be out there. You have to have some LinkedIn posts and be vigilant at keeping on top of that stuff. I mean, I know I personally wish I had more time or did it more religiously. But there are people that, set very strict calendars for I will post something and they think a week ahead and really plan it all out. And I think that's the right way to do it. And when you read something that you think is really interesting, don't just share it. Share what you think about it. Share what is interesting about it. Give something back to your audiences, and people will start to reciprocate and remember you. And then that's where it starts, is sort of just being top of mind, because then when you are looking for a wealth manager, it's not like I'm sitting around all the time thinking about wealth managers, right? But then when you do need one, who's the first one that comes to mind? Well, it's that one that is in my feed a little bit more than the others, and the one that has a point of view that's a little bit different than the others. And so maybe I'll talk to that person, right? So it's about just being differentiated.
Yeah, that's very true, especially because in Canada, we do have a smaller population than our southern neighbors. And so you do have to be very precise with, who you're going after and who you're trying to target, because there aren't that many Canadians that can be your clients, particularly because some of these industries, they're very saturated, I would say. And so trying to at this point, in a lot of cases, unless you're trying to get the younger generation who is starting to build up their wealth, and I've heard of the acronym HENRYs recently, which is High Earners Not Rich Yet. which I think is quite fascinating. And that is, again, like, and there's been different acronyms for these individuals before, where you go after the market that isn't quite where you would want them to be quite at this point, but you're going to help them get there, right? And so when you're a part of that journey, again, you create those meaningful interactions, and you would have higher loyalty with your client base if you were to take that type of approach. Now, of course, uh, advisors who may be leaving and striking independent, part of the goal would be to hope that they have strong enough relationships with their existing clientele that their clientele would want to move over once they learn that their advisor has left the firm. But again, it's about having, to your point about these different strategies, and being, I suppose, mindful of the platforms that you use. And this is where, again, things like social media can be very impactful. As long as, of course, you're sending out the right messaging and the right information across.
Yeah. I mean, again, like if you're giving something, right, and you're not just advertising, but you're providing a value to a community. Again, I think that's where the social media can start to generate and build community. So if you've got really good wealth advice, or you have a really unique way of sharing that wealth advice in a way that people can consume it and understand it. Like we're seeing more wealth management experts on TikToks, right? And doing short vids, doing really quick, like, here's me with a credit card. Here's how, like, I'll show you how I do my bills. I'll show you how I budget. I'll show, like, show, don't tell, right? When you start doing that sort of stuff, it endears people to you. It's like, wow, this person's willing to help me figure this stuff out. So again, when it comes time for me to actually, make my millions of dollars, who am I going to turn to? It's going to be that person that helped me when I didn't have millions of dollars. And McDonald's and Happy Meals, like this sort of marketing to the next generation, and it's well known in this industry, and how young's too young, or how poor is not rich yet. You know what I mean? Like what levels? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself, and that's where market research and stuff is really important also.
Definitely. And I do believe that point you brought up about establishing that trust, where if you are more of a public figure and you get out there and you say, hey, I can help you, then people come to know you as someone that has helped and who is reliable and who knows what they're doing, right? It's like, oh, when I didn't know how to budget, this is the person I turned to. So now that I have money,
Yeah.
of course, they're the one I'm going to turn to, which makes all the sense in the world. How can, let's say, an industry that's very conservative have the right boundaries to use these platforms, if that makes sense? Like, how can they think about this? Is there a process they can go through? Because again, you mentioned this before, but like, it's not really something that they can ignore forever. Like, it's here,
Yeah.
it's staying. And so they need to figure out a way to get on there. And I've had some discussions with people in different firms who seem to be kind of struggling with this as well, which is, yes, we know it's there. We're just not sure how we can get on there.
It's easier to say no. It's easier to be the person that doesn't do it, right? And that lets the next person try to do it, right? So a lot of it comes down to a bit of fear of the unknown. The way I did it, I'm a communicator, so I find like I can reduce everything down to a communication challenge. Usually it has to do with awareness and understanding internally. All of those blockers, the people that are telling you can't, why, right? Like asking them why, and then understanding like, well, that can be solved. Those are you can work around those. Great example is when, again, I was telling you how like I helped introduce social media to a lot of pharma companies. Pharma being similar to wealth management or to the finance industry is quite conservative, obviously huge regulations, and they were really worried. The lawyers were all very worried about adverse event reporting. So pharma companies need to report to governments whenever something negative happens on a drug, and they post it on social media. They like, if it meets the certain requirements, they have to alert it. And you don't, as someone who sells a drug, you don't want to highlight too much how many people are having adverse events, right? So they didn't like the idea of social media because they were afraid that it was just going to invite all this adverse event reporting, and everyone was going to jump on and say things about their drugs. And the way we got around it was that, we invited the legal team to sit with the social media team for a few months. And they sat right next to each other. And every tweet, they'd look over their shoulder and be like, yeah, okay, you can say that. Right? And it was probably after 2 or 3 months that we did a meeting and we said, okay, so how many adverse event reports did we have to handle? And like how much extra work was it? And was it as big a problem? It's like, yeah, no one goes online and talks about how I took this drug for this medical reason and it had this, gave me gas. Like it's not something that people want to talk about. So very quickly, the legal team kind of relaxed a little bit. We put in the right mechanisms so that if there was any reporting, that it was very quickly monitored and things like that. And so there's always a way around it. And I think it comes down, again, to communication. So find the people that tend to be blockers, introduce them to it, show it to them, have them sit together, have them work together in a way to find a solution where it's like, okay, well, maybe we can't go full blast on social, but there's some ways that we can dip our toes and we can start trialing this. I would always recommend that, I'm not a no person, I'm a yes person. So if you find those no people, turn them into yes people by just, communicating effectively.
That makes sense. So it's getting the people that are hesitant because of legal or compliance or whatever reasons involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that would be a winning formula, because once you get people involved in a process, they tend to get excited too and they want it to work. So that's very good advice. Now, let's speak a bit about branding. So because all these firms, of course, have their own brands in the marketplace, and you can use social media platforms for that as well to enhance your brand and to ensure that, like I've been hearing the term stale when it comes to certain firms. Like, you don't want to be a stale firm, right? Who's just sort of stuck in the old ways and is not taking advantage of the socialization methods that we have now. But brand differentiation, establishing your brand, like let's talk about the financial industry, for instance. Like, again, we said that they're all very secure, so that's not a way they can differentiate themselves. They can differentiate themselves through other means, such as experiences. But now we speak about an advisor who may have left, and now they want to create a brand for themselves and differentiate them from perhaps where they used to be, or differentiate themselves from maybe the corporate umbrella, because they feel like, oh, now maybe I can do things more, I can do things more quickly. How should they go about like trying to establish their brands?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first you have to understand the difference between brand and branding, right? So branding is like the logo, and it's the colors and the fonts, and it's how you apply it to your stationery and your email signature and things like that. A brand is rooted in the behavior of the organization, right? And it's meant to be sort of a symbol of trust in that organization. And trust is built by following through on promises, right? And so reputation is sort of this view of the past. Trust is sort of a promise of the future, right? If I use this, it will do, it'll benefit me in these ways. And so the best way to establish trust is to, commit to something, right? And follow through and show people that you follow through, right? Act, don't talk. And again, social media can be a great way to do that, because it's a platform where it's like, well, here's how I do it. Here's what's being done. And you will build trust through action, not through words. So that's one aspect for sure. But then you also have to just be in front of people, right? Your brand is only so good as the people that know it and believe in it and want to reinforce it. So if you can be there when people need you, then they'll be there when you need them. And so again, building community around a brand is sort of the new way of, I shouldn't even say it's that new, it's actually an old way, but with social channels and the ability to create groups within different platforms, we're seeing that a lot more, where people are curating audiences and building sort of communities out of those audiences. So it's not just talking to everybody. I'm talking to people that are inherently interested. And they're interested, more than just interested, they're actually willing to be participants. And so if you can share the same values. If your brand can share the same values as your audience, then you're winning. It's a winning formula. And if you can demonstrate it, and you can show it, and you can act on it, then you're building trust.
Hmm. That's fascinating. You you have so much experience within the marketing realm. Can you give some examples of how people go about building those communities? And
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it in Web3 a lot. Like Web3 has been really good at creating these sorts of communities. Now, it's younger people, a lot of them, that have a shared passion for technology and for disrupting the status quo that we're seeing in the world. And so Web3 to them is sort of like taking the internet back from the corporations. And so, you know, that's where the shared values come in. And so the organizations that are building these decentralized networks, those communities are very active. And so a platform like Discord is used quite a lot, or Telegram, where you create these groups. And it's just, you know, like for me in my old age, like I find a lot of it to be just like the way that it's just the information is just kind of in a stream. I don't enjoy it that much, but I think for young people, they're used to it. It's just a constant stream. It's like of consciousness from the community, and it just keeps building and building, and more people jump on, and everyone putting their voice in, and everyone thinks their opinion's important, so they share it. But again, the best communities are the ones that acknowledge those opinions and take them on board and be like, hey, that's a great idea. Let me try to implement that. And now all of a sudden you're co-creating this brand, and you're co-creating this service and this product and this offering with the community. More people want to be part of that. Now I'm part of something bigger, right? Now I'm part of, you know, and people crave community. So that's typically how it's done. Now, is it easier to do it with like cool brands like Nike and yes, probably, right? Like wealth management, less sexy, I think, to especially people that don't have wealth yet. But there's room there to build communities as well, I think. And they might be a little bit smaller, they might be a little bit more tight knit, but we're talking about an industry that doesn't have a huge marketplace as well, right? Like there's the 1%, you know, or the, you know, maybe 10%. But the fact is that they still have questions. They still have, you know, the world is scary right now for everybody. And so if there's someone that's standing up and helping them make sense of the world, and what do I do with my money, and should I buy gold? And there's lots of questions, right? So if you can help answer them, then you'll build community. You just have to find the right platform. I don't know necessarily if, you know, depending on their age, if they're going to be on Facebook. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be using Telegram or Discord. So that's where I think a lot of research is still important, to understand who your audience is. Where are they already? Because you want to go where they are. You don't want to force them to go somewhere where they're not, because they won't.
right. It's interesting. During the pandemic, I saw a lot of like Twitch streamers who were day trading.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think they were doing a bit of a disservice, because they would, of course, enter the trade, and then all their followers would go and enter the trade afterwards, because they would mention what it was. But like some of those guys would have like 70, 80,000 people live watching concurrently. And so there definitely was, or is still, I believe, appetite for that type of information. And so when I think about it, if you are an advisor who's trying to now establish themselves, like maybe you go and you post like a weekly video, and especially if you show your credentials and people feel like they can trust you, and you just start small, like 15-minute, like weekly, like what happened in the market this week updates. You know, I feel like that would be a great way to like start building that community. And yes, you know, probably a large chunk of those people may not end up becoming your client, but you will find some, and they will be worthy, I feel. Um, so that's actually a really good point, and a great way that you can build that community is by using these different channels, as you mentioned. Um, I was very fascinated when I learned that you worked for Coke, I believe.
PepsiCo
Or
was one of my
PepsiCo.
clients. Yeah.
Yes. So the reason why I was fascinated is because there's always those like Coke versus Pepsi challenges. And since we are speaking about brand and differentiating, I think this is a good example of like how those two brands establish themselves and try to differentiate themselves. So can you speak a bit about that. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, just to clarify, like the work I did with PepsiCo, we didn't really touch Pepsi. We didn't touch the individual product brands too much. It was actually a lot more around like sustainability and developmental projects with people in places like, children. And we did a lot of like positive communications work for the company, for the corporation, for in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. But yeah, I mean, just based on my experience, how does Coke differentiate from Pepsi, and how do they keep on top of people's minds? Like, there's a lot of tricks, right? If you think about a lot of marketers look at the user journey, right? And you have to think about what are the touch points. And if you think about when you buy a Coke or a Pepsi, when you make that decision, and it's in a grocery store or it's at the gas station, right? And you have a fridge there with Coke and you have a fridge there with Pepsi, and they're super branded. But then as you walk in, how many times did you see a Coke ad? How many times did you see a Pepsi ad, right? How many in shopper marketing, right? There's science behind this stuff. When I worked with GSK, they had a whole shopper lab. It was basically a recreation of a drugstore or a corner store, and they would practice. They would have people come in and they would be like, okay, well, if we had a dangler over here, or if we had, this new technology or a touch screen here, like how will people use it? What part of the store should we put it? Like, there's so much science and data that goes into advertising because it's such a big business. And people don't realize that. They don't realize that they're being manipulated to some degree. And so if you like Pepsi or you like Coke, it may come down to taste, but it also may come down to who manipulated you better. So it's not the most positive way to look at the industry. But if you think about taking those same tactics and that same budget and that same effort, and you put it towards drinking water or saving the environment, imagine the impact you could have, right? So that's where, like, I think a lot of companies should start thinking about their advertising and their marketing, is using those same tools and using that same energy, but doing it in a positive way, as opposed to trying to just get me to drink more sugar water.
right. It's very interesting, and one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you was because I learned about your firm, um, and I was really fascinated by how you've established it and how you're trying to focus on what I would say the future of work, where you. I suppose why don't you explain what it is, and then I'll ask a few questions about it.
Sure. I mean, it's probably better if I tell you the story of how I came about it. So, when I left big agency, I started working on my own because I had the experience. Freelancing wasn't such a dirty word, right? The gig economy was kind of becoming a thing. I was still in Asia at the time, and I really enjoyed working for myself. I loved being able to. I was at the time, I think I was on a beach in Thailand for a while, just working and making money, and like, this is great. No bosses to tell me what to do. I set my own deadlines, and I can work how I want, where I want. But what happened really quickly was I started to get lonely. I started missing colleagues, and I started missing what I really loved about agency was the diversity of the people and being able to, work across, different markets and brainstorm with people from around the world and all of that sort of stuff. And, as I made my way back to Canada, I started to realize, well, what if, I've been hearing about the agency model being broken for a long time, but no one's really tried to fix it. No one's really tried to make a recommendation for what it could look like if you took out the shareholders, if it wasn't all just driving all the value upwards to the shareholders and forcing young people to work to the bone, essentially, which, or sometimes free if you think about the way that interns are used in the industry. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like about big agencies, but there was a lot of stuff I did. And so I thought, well, what if we just recreated everything we love about big agencies? Being able to work with really cool people, being able to organize ourselves with different disciplines and build these interdisciplinary teams to solve big problems for clients, right? And big campaigns and award-winning campaigns and really creative things. You can't really do it on your own, but you can do it with a global group of really smart people who are all working for themselves. And more of those people are opting not to work in corporations. And, CEOs are deciding they still want to stay in the game, but they don't necessarily want to be CEOs of a corporation anymore. So those people have a lot of knowledge. Let's tap them. Let's bring together all these really, really smart people, and let's give them a platform where we can innovate. So we have people from different backgrounds. So take someone who has a sales background, and then you take someone who's got a marketing background, and you build a new product. And then now you have BriteBirch to help promote it. We have sort of a referral network that's going on too, so people are helping each other out and finding opportunities. And as and when clients come to us and say, "Hey, I have this challenge," you can either go to a big agency and you're paying for all these hidden costs and these fancy offices, and there's P&L issues that people don't realize that happens behind the scenes of how agencies work. And so it's not as easy to do multi-market stuff, and it's not as easy as you think to kind of get those interdisciplinary teams. Or you can hire freelancers, and it's like herding cats. How do I know that they're going to work well together, right? We're kind of fitting in this new area where it's like, well, we'll do all of the herding for you, and we'll make sure that everyone is buying into this concept of working collaboratively. So to be in BriteBirch, you have to buy into this idea. And then when clients have a challenge, then we build the team that they actually need, the team that fits their budget, that fits the speed that they want to go. If you require someone in a certain place, we'll put someone from that place. If you require a certain perspective on the team, or someone that can think a little bit outside the box, right? We'll bring that person in. If you need a technologist, if you need a management consultant, if you need someone from a specific industry who's got years of experience, we can bring those people into the team. And so the teams that we're building don't look like regular marketing teams. They look like super duper, like talented, experienced teams that, because everyone's got experience too, it makes my life easier. It's a lot less hand-holding. Everyone just does the work they want to do, and everyone sets their prices, and I don't dictate any of that. So it's an interesting, new model, and we're learning all the time. It's not always perfect, but the hardest part about working in an agency, but also working in this new model, is the people, the human element, right? Everyone's got their own desires and personalities, and so managing that's always been the hardest part of marketing, I think, in my mind.
Yeah, it sounds great. And again, the reason I was fascinated when I learned about your model ties into what we spoke about earlier on AI, and the fact that this idea of like a 9 to 5 may not always be there. And so to have these types of agencies or firms, or however you want to describe yourself, where people can jump in and out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as needed. You know what? Hey, we need you for this. Are you willing? Are you interested in being a part of this project? And people can say yes or no, and they'll have that freedom. And I think that will create like some amazing things, because it'll be so voluntary, and it'll be because there's a passion, and it just thinking about the possibility of that, of all of that, is very exciting to me, where we are going to have an opportunity to move towards this futurized work model, where you can work on things that you're genuinely interested in and passionate about, and that contribute back to society in good ways.
And be paid well for it, right? Like that's the thing. It's not. You're not getting a certain hourly wage. You're getting the price that you set for the work that you do because of the years of knowledge that you have, right? So the value is there for everybody, and the model is built on this concept I've coined, the infinite sum model. But, where traditional agencies are a zero-sum game, right? You have pitches, and there's one agency wins, and within that agency, the people that really win are sort of the more senior people, or the shareholders. I believe that there's enough opportunity, and there's enough work out there, and there's enough desire by clients to work with people that really know what they're doing. And one of the biggest gripes is agencies will roll out all these big important people at the pitch, and then once they win the business, you never see them again, right? We actually have those important people. They're the ones rolling up their sleeves doing the work. And so I think really generating value for everybody. There's a way that we can all win here. And I'm really trying to find that sort of really middle ground, that common ground, where we can provide the community. Freelancing's challenging. It's tough. When I'm someone who has always been able to, sell, right? But, if you're a creative or a copywriter, it's not in your nature necessarily, or you have a lot of anxiety trying to sell your services, or now you have a platform to help you do that. You have people you can turn to who have been doing this for a long time. They can, if you have to go chase a client for payment, it can be quite daunting if you're by yourself, but now you've got this sort of company, this agency behind you who can help you go do that. And so there's a lot of sort of benefits for the consultants. There's a lot of benefits for the clients. And I think we can all, do well without having to be too greedy.
Yeah. No, it again sounds amazing, and what I believe will definitely be a fairly large chunk of the future work model as these new technologies roll out,
Hmm.
and as people, are able to explore different opportunities and discover new things about themselves, perhaps hidden talents, because your agency is predominantly for marketing, but there may be others who set up agencies for different things, right?
Yeah.
You can have, I don't know, an agency for like data analytics and stats and so on and so forth. And it's all about the people that are here are genuinely interested in this work. And they may not again want that strict 9 to 5 or a job that they have to go to every day, and now it's you come in when you're ready, and we have some projects here for you to work on. So I think all of that is very exciting, and for people who do have a bit of wariness around technology and AI and where it's headed in the future, especially as it impacts people, things like this alleviate some of those fears where it's like, okay, there are some great things to look forward to as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we have members that are, you know, on maternity leave, right? Or they've stepped away from corporate life for a while and they're just trying new things. There's people that are fully employed that, have side hustles and just consult because they want to lend their expertise. And we have people that build their whole business within our platform and are able to, generate, quite a lot of business. So it's it's trying to be all things to all people. And I was always told like you can't make everyone happy, but I'm sure gonna try, like I'm sure gonna it's sort of in my nature to try to please everyone. Drives the people that know me, it drives them nuts that I'm like that. But I think there's an opportunity for us to organize ourselves differently as workers, as employees, and we're starting to see that in the corporate world too, right? Like with COVID, it sort of forced people to realize that silos in businesses don't make a lot of sense, right? If there's an issue in a business, it's not an HR issue, it's not a IT issue, it's the business, it's the company's issue, and if the team that can best solve the issue is probably a combination of HR, IT, and all these different departments. And so rethinking how people operate, even within corporations, is changing. And it's really interesting to see that a lot of the work we do is fractional. So we'll put people directly inside the company and we'll help them sort of organize themselves. You don't have to hire a person necessarily on a full year's salary and all the insurance, and takes sometimes 6 months to hire a senior person of any quality. And even then, they still might not like it, and they might leave, and you've wasted all that effort. I mean, there's a lot less risk in these kinds of models as well, where it's like, well, let me trial you out first. Let me see if this is actually a position we need to hire for. Let's get someone in who knows what they're doing. And we're seeing a lot more of that too. And AI is becoming, we talk about perspective, and we bring different perspectives around the table for clients. AI is one of those perspectives, right? Like it's one of the tools. It's one of the seats at the table now, and technology will continue to be implemented across these organizations. It's just going to be interesting to see its impact. It's going to be interesting to see just how it's leveraged.
Definitely. Jamie, thank you. This has been a very insightful conversation.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Of course. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, like, and subscribe, and we will catch you at the next one.